They sealed the records for 200 years. Why? Because what happened inside the Greyfield estate was not just murder, it was ritual. 14 of the most powerful men in colonial South Carolina, the kings of rice, the architects of human bondage, walked into a meeting room in the summer of 1716, and not a single one of them walked out alive. 3 days later, searchers broke open the doors. What they found was not chaos, not blood spattered randomly like a brawl or drunken fight. No, what they discovered was order. Charred bodies arranged in a perfect circle around a coal furnace, their shackled hands glinting in the dim light. Their mouths stuffed with raw cotton, a grotesque silence imposed even in death. And at the center of this infernal geometry, a woman they considered property, slave, Esperanza de Lima. She was not hiding. She was not weeping. She sat calmly in the kitchen, sharpening knives with mechanical precision, humming a lullaby in Portuguese, as if the massacre had been nothing more than an evening's work. When questioned, she gave only one answer: justice burns slower than coal, but burns complete. This is Fear Liturgy, and tonight, you step into the archive they never wanted you to see. What you are about to hear is not the sanitized version of history. It is not the plantation fairy tale polished for textbooks or softened for museums. This is the hidden record, a truth so volatile that colonial authorities locked it away, terrified that the story itself could spread like wildfire. Because Esperanza was not just a servant who snapped, she was something else. A strategist, a daughter of a fallen African chief, a living weapon forged by 15 years of cruelty, humiliation, and calculation. You've been told history is written by the victors. What you were not told is that the most dangerous stories were never written at all. They were buried, suppressed, sealed in archives where only the powerful could read them. And this, the Greyfield Massacre, is one of those stories. Listen carefully. What I'm about to share with you is not just a tale of vengeance. It is a blueprint, a glimpse into how the oppressed, when pushed beyond endurance, can bend fear into a blade sharp enough to cut through empires. And once you hear it, you can never go back. Before the massacre, before the circle of fire, there was a girl. Not the nameless slave written in ledgers, not the property stamped with a price, but a daughter of power. Esperanza de Lima was born on the western coast of Africa, not in chains, but in lineage. Her shoulders carried the scar patterns of royal blood, symbols of a chieftain's daughter. They were carved into her skin by elders who believed she would lead, not serve. But power attracts predators. Portuguese raiders descended on her village one night like shadows with torches. She watched her father, a man of wisdom and strategy, burned alive before her eyes. She watched her people scattered, bound, dragged into the underbelly of the Santa Maria, a ship built for human cargo. And as the sea carried her westward across the dark Atlantic, something in her hardened. Her body was chained. Her destiny was not. When she arrived in Charleston in 1701, she was 20 years old. Colonial merchants examined her like livestock, calculating her muscle mass, her teeth, the way they would with cattle. They did not see the fire behind her eyes. They did not know the lessons she carried from her homeland, lessons of patience, deception, of strategy, of herbs and poisons dismissed by colonists as superstition, but understood by her as science. She was purchased by Edmund Greyfield, a man whose name still drips with cruelty, even in suppressed records. His plantation was infamous, whispered about in slave quarters like a curse. Slaves sent to Greyfield either died quickly or lived as hollow shells, broken not just in body but in spirit. And into this crucible of torment, Espironza was thrown. But unlike the others, she refused to die inside. She observed. For 15 years, she pretended not to understand English while memorizing every word. Pretended to bow in obedience while listening to the private conversations of her captors. Pretended to be broken while cataloging every cruelty, every pattern, every weakness. Most slaves were taught despair. Esperanza taught herself calculation. She stored knowledge the way other women stored recipes, How often the Rice Council met, which men drank too much, who left the room and when, which guard fell asleep at which hour. She became invisible to her captors, and invisibility is the most dangerous power of all, because invisibility means you can watch. And when you watch long enough, you learn how gods bleed. Power in the colonies was never random. It was organized, hidden behind wealth and titles, cloaked in the illusion of civility. Sat the Rice Council, 14 men who treated South Carolina as their kingdom, and every black body as their machinery. They met monthly at Greyfield estate, not because it was convenient, but because Edmund Greyfield himself was their unspoken leader. On the surface, their meetings were business. Rice prices, trade regulations, land expansion. But underneath, it was something darker, a ritual of power where men sharpened cruelty like a blade. They compared techniques of breaking human will as though discussing agricultural methods. One boasted about caloric rations that kept slaves alive just long enough to squeeze maximum labor before death. Another bragged about a new torture designed to make disobedience vanish for generations. These were not careless men. They were architects of a system designed to erase identity, to crush resistance before it even sparked. Espironza stood in those rooms, silent and invisible, pouring wine into their cups. To them, she was furniture, a shadow, a vessel that moved plates from one table to another, and in that blindness lay their downfall. Because while they laughed about separating families, she was memorizing names. While they plotted laws to tighten chains, she was listening for cracks in their armor. These men believed themselves untouchable gods of rice and blood. They were too powerful to be questioned by London, too wealthy to be challenged by fellow colonists. They saw themselves not as participants in slavery, but as its engineers, its scientists, its priests. And every month, in that candlelit dining hall, Esperanza stood inches away, her face impassive, her mind a storm. Do you see the design, listener? Institutions always work this way. Power collects not in open chambers of democracy, but in hidden councils where decisions are made in smoke-filled rooms. They write the laws, then laugh about the laws they've written. They create suffering, then profit from solving the very suffering they engineered. This is not just the story of 1716. It is the anatomy of control in every century. Esperanza knew it. She studied it. For 15 years, she allowed them to sharpen their cruelty, unaware that she was sharpening something far greater, their destruction. And when gods believe themselves invincible, they forget the one truth whispered across every empire in history: all gods can die. Esperanza had learned invisibility, but invisibility does not mean emptiness. In the hidden quarters of the plantation, away from the marble dining halls and silver goblets, she found something forbidden connection. His name was Wayne, a man from the Gold Coast who carried scars across his back like scripture. He was strong, not just in muscle, but in silence. He did not break when the overseer's whip cut flesh. He did not lower his gaze when Edmund Greyfield passed by. And in that defiance, Esperanza saw a reflection of herself. Their conversations were whispers stolen in the dark, stories of a homeland neither would ever see again. Dreams of freedom that lived like fragile embers in a storm. He taught her songs in his language. She taught him the lullabies of her lost mother. In a world designed to erase love, they created it in secret. But love is dangerous under tyranny. The masters understood this better than anyone. Bonds of affection breed loyalty. Loyalty breeds defiance, and defiance breeds rebellion. And so, one evening, when a guard caught them together, the punishment was swift. They tied Wayne to a wooden post in the center of the yard. The council was in session that night, and Edmund Greyfield invited his guests to witness what he called a lesson in discipline. With their wine still warm in their throats, the men stood in a semicircle and watched as the overseer raised a brand of iron from the fire. Esperanza was forced to stand at the front, her wrists bound, her eyes wide as the searing metal burned into Wayne's chest. He did not scream. He did not beg. He only looked at her one long, unbroken gaze until his body collapsed into silence. The guests applauded Greyfield's justice. They returned to their dining hall. Plates were reset. Laughter resumed. For them, it was entertainment. For Esperanza, it was ignition. That night, she washed the blood from the floorboards with her bare hands, but every drop carved itself into her memory. She understood then what she had been preparing for all along. Not survival, not patience. War. The council thought they had extinguished love. In truth, they had weaponized it. They had given Espironza not just a reason to endure, but a reason to burn the world they ruled. And when love is turned to ash, what remains is fire. 15 years? That was the distance between Wami's death and the night of the Greyfield massacre. To the council, those years were routine harvests, shipments, profits, new laws written to cement their dominion. To Espironza, those same years were not survival. They were architecture. Every day a brick. Every humiliation, a calculation. Every drop of blood, another step toward fire. She studied them the way a scholar studies scripture. She learned the weakness of their stomachs, which wines left them sluggish, which meats spoiled fastest in the heat. She memorized their dependencies. Greyfield's obsession with laudanum, another's reliance on young mistresses, another's gambling debts whispered to smugglers. She mapped their vices like cartographers map rivers, knowing each one could be a weapon. By day, she was a servant. By night, she became a chemist. From scraps of herbs stolen from the fields, she distilled powders that could sicken without killing. Testing carefully on rats in the shadows of the granary, from rusted nails she hid beneath her mat, she learned to sharpen points fine enough to pierce flesh unseen. She understood the chemistry of fire better than any colonist, knowing which oils burned slow and which exploded. But her greatest weapon was not fire. It was patience. Patience is the tyrant's blind spot. The council believed fear was immediate, that resistance would spark quickly and die quickly. They never imagined fear could simmer, that a single woman could store rage for a decade and a half, polishing it until it gleamed like a blade. In secret, she built alliances not with other slaves, for she knew betrayal could spread like rot, but with silence itself. She told no one. She trusted no one. She carried her plan in the prison of her own skull, locked behind an expression of obedience. Every yes, master, was a dagger hidden behind a smile. And then came the calendar. She knew the council met every summer solstice, the longest day of the year. The men boasted of harvests and drank into midnight. For 15 years, she served their tables on that day, watching their guards grow lax, their laughter grow loud. For 15 years, she rehearsed the scene, arranging it in her mind like theater, where they would sit, how the doors could be locked, where the fire would be lit. Most rebellions are spontaneous sparks of anger that burn bright and then die in the sand. Esperanza's was not a spark, it was a furnace. A slow fire that waited until the iron was hottest. And on the 15th year, the iron was ready. June 21st, 1716, the summer solstice. The Greyfield dining hall glowed with candlelight. Its oak table heavy with roasted meats, rice wine, and silver goblets polished like mirrors. Outside, the swamps hummed with insects, the air wet and thick. The kind of night where the world feels suspended, holding its breath. The council had gathered as always. 14 men drunk on wealth, drunk on certainty, drunk on their own immortality. They laughed, boasting of new fields opened, new ships filled, new profits carved from backs and blood. None of them noticed that the wine tonight was stronger, darker. None of them asked why the candles burned with such a strange scent. Esperanza moved among them, her hands steady, her face unreadable. She poured, she served, she listened. To them, she was still invisible, a shadow in a plain dress, nothing more. But in her silence, every detail was unfolding according to a script rehearsed for 15 years. At 11:47 p.m., the last of the guards slumped against the wall outside, unconscious from the wine she had laced with powder. At 11:52, the heavy oak doors swung shut. They did not slam, they closed with the quiet finality of a coffin lid. One by one, the iron latches fell into place. The men inside barely noticed at first. They were too deep in their toasts, too loud in their laughter. At midnight, Esperanza lit the first fire. Not in the hearth, where flames were expected, but in the circle of coal she had arranged days earlier, disguised as a servant's cleaning task. The coals ignited slow, glowing orange, then red, then white. Smoke rose low to the floor, creeping beneath the table like a living thing. It was then they noticed. The doors locked, the windows barred, the air thickening with smoke. And at the far end of the room, Espironza stood. No longer silent, no longer invisible. She met their eyes one by one, and in a voice steady as stone, she spoke the only words the records preserved. You thought fear belonged to you. Tonight, fear belongs to me. Panic erupted. Chairs toppled, hands clawed at the doors, voices rose in desperate screams, but it was too late. The air itself was fire. The circle had been drawn, and the gods of rice and blood had become prisoners in their own temple. And Esperanza, calm, unflinching, was the high priestess of their destruction. The first man to fall was William Petton, the richest rice planter in the Americas. His voice, once used to dictate the prices of human lives, broke into a shriek so raw that even the walls seemed to recoil. He clawed at the smoke, eyes wide, stumbling over the overturned goblets that glittered like blood under the firelight. One by one, the council fractured. Some begged, their tongues thick with fear. Some prayed, choking on words they had never spoken with sincerity. Others cursed Esperanza, spitting promises of torture and death that evaporated in the smoke before they reached her ears. But none could command her. None could bribe her. None could escape. Esperanza moved with terrifying calm. She had shackles in her hands, the same iron chains they had once used on others. With ruthless precision, she bound them, dragging each man into the circle. Forcing their bodies into positions that mocked their old council rituals. Where they once sat as kings over rice and blood, they now knelt as offerings to a furnace that roared hotter with every breath. The furnace itself became something more than metal and flame. Its glow flickered against the walls, casting monstrous shadows that looked less like men and more like demons being dragged back into the pit. The heat blistered skin, stripped arrogance, peeled away the layers of power that had shielded these men their entire lives. Esperanza's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. No screaming, no pleading, only her, humming. A lullaby in Portuguese, the same one her mother had sung to her in the village before it burned. The sound was steady, haunting, the rhythm of memory and vengeance fused into ritual. Each note made the panic sharper, the terror more complete. By 1:13 a.m., the screams had become fewer. Some of the men had collapsed, choking, their bodies writhing like broken animals. By 1:27, only 3 remained conscious, their eyes bloodshot, their lips split and bleeding as they begged for mercy that had never been in their vocabulary until that night. Esperanza gave them none. She raised her hand, her face expressionless, and with deliberate slowness fed the furnace the last of the coal. The flames surged, engulfing the circle. The air became a wall of heat, unbreathable, undeniable, unstoppable. And then silence. Not peace, not release, but the kind of silence that only comes after the end of gods. By the time the morning sun rose over Charleston, Greyfield estate was silent. Not a scream, not a groan, only the lingering heat of coals and the scent of charred flesh. To the casual observer, the plantation seemed deserted. The usual clatter of labor and orders vanished, but the horror waiting inside could not remain hidden for long. 3 days later, authorities arrived. What they discovered was a record of deliberate annihilation. The charred bodies arranged in a perfect circle, shackled hands, mouths stuffed with cotton. The very furniture realigned as though mocking the fallen. But here's the secret they never told you. Official reports were sanitized. Names were erased. Details buried under layers of colonial bureaucracy. Governor Robert Johnson himself ordered the records sealed. No one outside the inner circle was to speak of it. The Greyfield massacre, as it came to be whispered in hidden quarters, vanished from public memory for over 2 centuries. Why? Because knowledge is power, and power fears exposure. To acknowledge that a single woman, once considered property, could orchestrate the deaths of the colony's elite would unravel the illusion of control. The governor, the colonial council, even merchants in Charleston, all understood that the story of Esperanza de Lima challenged the very foundation of their social order. The myth that emerged in the shadows was distorted. People whispered of fires that burned without hands and ghostly women who could summon spirits. Legends softened the truth, turning a tactical, intelligent, and patient act of vengeance into something supernatural. It was easier for society to dismiss it as myth than face the truth. The system could be outmaneuvered. The untouchable were not untouchable. Esperanza herself disappeared into history like smoke from the furnace. Some say she escaped into Spanish Florida. Others whisper she remained hidden, watching, planning further moves. A ghost among the enslaved, ensuring her lessons spread without ever being named. In her message, though silent to the public eye, echoed through generations. Oppression is temporary. Strategy, patience, and resolve endure. Here's the hidden lesson. The most powerful acts of resistance are often invisible at first. They are deliberate, calculated, and unseen. Power assumes it is absolute until it isn't, and the very systems designed to crush humanity often forge its most intelligent survivors. At this point, listener, I want you to pause. Comment below the coal burns complete, and again, repeat it. Let the phrase anchor your understanding of power, patience, and consequence. Write it twice. Commit it. This is not superstition. This is recognition, a lock-in of awareness, an identity shift. What the colonists never realized, what history tried to bury, is that the massacre was more than vengeance. It was a lesson in control. For centuries, power has relied on fear, ritual, and symbols to maintain dominance. The Rice Council thought themselves untouchable because they manipulated lives like chess pieces. They believed violence, legality, and wealth were enough to bend every soul to their will. But Esperanza de Lima proved the system had cracks. Every institution that seeks to control humanity does so with a quiet hand. Laws codify obedience. Education teaches compliance. History glorifies the victors. And when these mechanisms combine, the collective mind forgets how to resist. It forgets strategy, patience, and cunning, the very tools Esperanza wielded flawlessly. She understood psychology better than the men who crushed her. She knew patterns of arrogance, predictability, and carelessness, and she turned them into weapons. The power of the few over the many is fragile. Not because the many are weak, but because the few underestimate the capacity of minds they consider inferior. A single person who observes, remembers, and calculates can undermine decades of structured oppression. 15 years of silence and a single night reshaped an entire colony's understanding of fear. This is the lesson they tried to erase. That knowledge is dangerous. Because once a man understands how systems of control operate, he cannot see the world the same way. He begins to notice patterns, to see vulnerabilities in the supposedly invincible, to understand how propaganda, intimidation, and ritualized fear manipulate behavior. The most powerful are often blind to the subtle forces that can dismantle them. Esperanza's method was meticulous, surgical, psychological. She weaponized patience, ritual, and observation. She turned centuries of oppression into a blueprint for rebellion. And though history buried her name, the knowledge remains waiting for the ones brave enough to recognize it. Those who understand her story learn something terrifying and liberating. Control is never absolute. Systems are never perfect, and one mind, sharpened like a blade, can bend reality itself. And so the Greyfield estate stands silent today, a monument not to wealth or power, but to the limits of both. 14 men who thought themselves gods, reduced to ash and shadow by the one they considered powerless. Esperanza de Lima's story does not end with the furnace. It echoes in every corner of history where the oppressed rise, quietly unseen, until the system collapses under its own arrogance. The lesson is clear. Fear can be mastered. Oppression can be studied, understood, and weaponized against those who wield it. Knowledge is not neutral, it is dangerous. And when you choose to see patterns, to observe, to wait, patience itself becomes an instrument of power. Esperanza was no miracle. She was a student of life under tyranny. She became what every enslaver underestimated: a strategist, a warrior, a mind untouchable. You've seen the furnace, the circle, the ritual of destruction. But remember this: the true furnace is the mind. The true circle is observation and patience. The true weapon is the knowledge of human nature, honed in silence, waiting for the precise moment to act. And once that moment arrives, it is unstoppable. Here on Fear Liturgy, we explore these truths: the forbidden, the suppressed, the dangerous knowledge hidden in history's shadows. If this story unsettled you, challenged your understanding of power, or awakened something in you that refuses to be silenced, then take action. Subscribe. Hit the bell icon. Share this with someone who dares to see the truth behind the facade. And remember the phrase, "the coal burns complete"? The coal burns complete. Comment it, lock it in. Let it remind you that patience, observation, and calculated action can tip the scales of even the most entrenched power. History is full of secrets. Some will try to erase them, some will fear them. But you, the ones willing to see, the ones willing to learn, are the ones who hold the edge. Tonight, you are no longer a passive observer. You are a witness. You are a student. You are the fire waiting to reshape the world.